involved is genuinely beyond a reasonable doubt. The Hoover memo is not circumstantial evidence. It is direct eyewitness smoking gun evidence from the most influential figure in the history of American law enforcement. The rest of the evidence merely provides a context for this memo that makes it impossible to reasonably believe that the former president was not involved in the murder of John Kennedy. If we could present this evidence to an unbiased jury in Texas, they would certainly give him the death penalty. Ow! Ooh! Ooch! Oh! Ow! Ooh! Ow! Oh! Take it easy, fellas! Ow! Ooh! Ooch! Oh! Ow! Ooh! Ow! Oh! Take it easy, fellas! Ow! Ooh! Ow! When I was just a little fool, my mama sent me off to a place called school. I liked the part about taking a nap. It seemed everything else was a load of crap. No fooling. Taught us George Washington chopped down the cherry tree so we could all have freedom, justice, and liberty. Did I mention Columbus discovered America? Well, I went off to college, and believe it or not, the harder I studied, the dumber I got. Taught us we was all geniuses, folks back home was asses, and elites like us ought to rule the masses. Some schooling. Had to drop out, though. Just couldn't seem to get my shoulders inside my asshole. Well, I got slapped in the face. No, it couldn't have been ruder. By a friend with a film by a guy named Zapruder showed Kennedy's brains getting blowed out the back. Seems the Warren Commission was hooked on crack. And the FBI, and all the TV and radio, and every newspaper on God's green earth. Well, the day JFK got blown away, old George Bush was in the CIA, and though E. Howard Hunt might have held the gun, George Bush Sr. was surely the one that said do it. Told him again during Watergate, do it. Sold that slogan to Nike. 40 years later, I'm preaching away. Seems my head's still out in the light of day, but people are still crying, Kennedys are still dying, and the TV and the papers and the teachers still lying. Seems it's still pretty dark out. In the middle of the day, even if you don't have your head shoved up 3 miles up your asshole. There are many things we will never know about the assassination. The guilty parties have done all they can to make it this way. Investigations have been blocked. Much evidence has been destroyed. Witnesses have been murdered. We are left with bits and pieces. So what do? If we do what scientists do, we take the bits and pieces and try to guess what they mean, argue with each other, and try to figure it out. If we do what the prosecutors do, we develop a theory about what happened based on the evidence and challenge the accused to come up with an alternative explanation that isn't ridiculous. There are certain things about the Hoover memo that demand answers. Why did George Bush lie and say he was not the George Bush referred to in the memo? Why would the CIA ask the FBI to report to them about CIA operations? And why would George Bush leave Dallas the day of the assassination and travel all the way to Washington, D.C. to receive this stupid, lying report? We're going to take up these questions and others, and we should, because this is one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case and really deserves careful examination. To understand what was in Hoover's mind when he wrote the memo, we need some historical background to understand the complex relationships between the FBI, the CIA, and Lee Harvey Oswald. While Oswald was in the Marines, he was stationed at a top-secret air base for U-2 spy planes, where he learned Russian. This is not the standard training for a Marine grunt. He was obviously being groomed for some sort of special intelligence work. He got a hardship discharge from the military to take care of his mother, who wasn't ill, and he immediately bought a plane ticket with money he didn't have and flew to Russia. As soon as he got to Russia, he renounced his U.S. citizenship and declared his intention to turn over all the military secrets he had learned while he was in the Marines. He later married, and after a few years returned to the U.S., where all his friends were men with CIA connections and who all died shortly after the assassination and before they could testify about their relationship with him. So Oswald very likely at some point worked for the CIA. But, according to declassified secret documents of the Warren Commission, they were told by the Dallas District Attorney and the Attorney General of the state of Texas
that Lee Harvey Oswald was working for the FBI at the time of the assassination, that his informant number was S-179, and that he was receiving $200 a month. In his wallet at the time of his arrest, he had the name, phone number, and license number of Dallas FBI agent James Hosty. Witnesses have testified about secret meetings and package exchanges between Oswald and other FBI agents outside this garage. In 1960, 3 years before the assassination, J. Edgar Hoover found time to write a memo regarding the lowly, insignificant lone nut Lee Harvey Oswald. What the hell did Hoover find so interesting about this guy 3 years before the assassination? Hoover's memo complained that someone was using Oswald's identity while Oswald was in Russia to buy trucks for CIA-trained anti-Castro Cubans. Given this pile of evidence, we have to admit that it was at least possible that Oswald was involved with the FBI. What could Oswald possibly have been doing for the FBI? Well, what was the FBI doing? Hoover was helping JFK crack down on the CIA.
Less than 3 months after becoming president, Kennedy awoke one morning to discover that the CIA had launched a major invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, using their secretly trained army of misguided anti-Castro Cubans. Allen Dulles, the CIA chief, figured that if he launched an invasion with the CIA's private army, Kennedy would be forced to order an all-out invasion of Cuba to back them up. Kennedy refused to go along, and the entire CIA army was killed or captured.
Recently declassified documents show that Kennedy had never approved the CIA plan for a massive invasion at the Bay of Pigs. And while Kennedy publicly took the blame for the CIA disaster,
there's an old saying that victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan. Because I'm the responsible officer of the government,
he quietly fired the top 3 men at CIA, Allen Dulles, Richard Bissell, and General Charles Cabell. He still had an army of CIA-trained Cuban terrorists to contend with. He lied to them.
I can assure you that this flag will be returned to this brigade in a free Havana.
And he allowed them to keep training for raids against Cuba at several CIA-sponsored training camps under various names: Operation 40, Operation Mongoose, Alpha 66, and several others. But the Cuban Missile Crisis changed everything, and most of all, it changed John Kennedy.
In October of 1962, the world was brought to the brink of nuclear war when Kennedy was told that the Russians were building nuclear missiles in Cuba 90 miles off American shores. Kennedy announced that the U.S. would stop all Russian ships headed towards Cuba. The Russians announced that they would not be stopped in international waters by U.S. ships. Both sides prepared for war.
At the very moment that the world teetered on the brink of nuclear disaster, against Kennedy's specific orders, the CIA sent a U-2 spy plane flying into Russian airspace, which could easily have been mistaken for a bomber getting ready for a first strike. Right in the middle of this critical period, as both sides prepared for full-scale nuclear war against Kennedy's specific orders, the CIA instigated attacks upon Cuba by their anti-Castro Cuban paramilitaries. These insane attempts by the CIA to provoke a nuclear holocaust changed Kennedy fundamentally. He caught a glimpse into the souls of his adversaries, and he spoke of them as having a collective death wish for the world. The missile crisis ended when the Russians agreed to dismantle their missiles in Cuba. However, Khrushchev, the Russian leader, insisted that these CIA training bases be dismantled, and that the Russians be allowed to verify this with inspections. Kennedy ordered these secret training bases closed, but many of the groups were openly defiant, refused to close the bases, and talked about murdering Kennedy. Kennedy ordered Hoover to locate these training bases and shut them down. Hoover was forced by Kennedy to go head-to-head with the CIA. Although no arrests were made, Hoover located the camps and shut them down. The question remains, how did Hoover locate these camps? Their location was secret